Good morning. Welcome to the April 4th, is that right? April 4th Finance Committee of the Board of School Directors. Just as a reminder, everybody, we are on tape. Please use microphone. I have it. Today's presentation is on student services budget. Vic, I guess I should just send it right over to Ms. Frazier.
Good morning. I appreciate the opportunity to be able to share student services and special education budget with you. As a starting point, just to share with you an overview of the department so that there's an understanding of what's encompassed within the department. You can see there are 7 student services and special education supervisors that work directly on our team. We cover within the department school health services, clinical services, gifted education, counseling, and special education. At the building level, our student services team members include the following, and as you read through that, I'm sure there's a lot of them that community members are well familiar with what their roles are. Some that might not be as familiar when you look at the job coaches. A job coach is a paraprofessional support staff member that works with our secondary students who are in work experience placements. So that's providing direct support for students with disabilities. You see the different therapists that work within our department, working with speech, occupational therapy, physical therapy, vision support, hearing support, and orientation and mobility. Orientation and mobility are for students who have a disability that impacts their ability to safely navigate their immediate surroundings. So an example of that would be a student who is legally blind, who needs support learning how to navigate sidewalks safely, how to cross traffic safely. An orientation and mobility specialist would be the one to provide that level of support. We do see over time some increases in the staffing numbers based on enrollment growth and also needs of our students. To do a general overview of the budget, this gives you a sense of, when you look at the entirety of the budget, where the majority of the funds go. You can see special education takes up a large portion of the budget. You can see with counseling services falling directly behind that. When you look at this slide, it is important to note that within special education funds there, gifted education is included within those numbers. So what I'll do for you this morning is I'll go through each of the groupings that we talked about that make up student services to give you a sense of the expenditures and what work is completed, kind of where the funding goes to support our students. So you can see total expenditures recommended for 18-19 for health services, just slightly over $4 million. We do provide health services to approximately 14,000 students. We provide within our own schools, of course. We also are required to provide supports within the non-public schools, which fall within district bounds. There are 20 non-public schools within our district bounds with an enrollment number of over 5,000. So when you think about the supports that we provide, it is interesting to also note with that the services that we have to provide for our non-public schools are really based on the school's geographic location, not the students who attend those schools' home district. So whether the students that are attending those non-public schools are actually Lower Merion School District residents, we still have to provide the mandated services through the Department of Health and PDE.
Wait, can you say that again? Students who come into our schools are our residents, so we...
Correct. So for the Lower Merion schools, we provide services because they are district residents. They're attending our schools. Right. For the non-public schools, it's based on where the schools are geographically located, what district is responsible for providing some support.
So our students who we send out, that municipality is responsible for their health services. So if we have Lower Merion School District student who attends a school in Malvern, that school district is responsible for their health services? Because if they sent a student to, say, one of our privates in Lower Merion, we would be responsible.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct. So it is a large and growing number of students that we're required to support. And this is also an area where we see staffing increases needed. Our staff, we utilize both certified school nurses and staff nurses. There is a cost difference between a staff nurse and a certified school nurse. We utilize staff nurses where we are able to. We have currently 13 certified school nurses that are required to deliver services. The supervisor does an excellent job of maximizing staff and really being creative with scheduling so that we make sure that we meet students' needs, but are doing it in the most cost-effective manner. Our health services staff are responsible for developing and managing medical 504 plans. A 504 plan is an accommodation plan to ensure student safety. So we have over 450 of those type of plans within the district. They're also responsible for helping to develop the emergency care plans for more than 700 students. And an emergency care plan is exactly what it says. What do we do in the event of an emergency for students who have medical needs? When you look at the expenses that are proposed, there are mandated services that are included within what we're required to provide: annual health screenings, medication administration, immunizations, physical exams, health-related trainings. All of that comes under the health services budget.
Kim, with the 504 plans, are they only district students, or would a student at a non-pub have a 504 that we would have to manage?
Correct.
We would?
They could. Mhm.
Okay, and same thing for medications?
For the medical aspects of it. So we do have some health service providers that are district staff that go into some of our the non-public schools to provide direct nursing, like healthcare support.
Do we participate in the writing of those 504 plans then?
Yes. So some of the other things that our health services team members do, they serve a vital role on our teams, working with our school-age transition teams. So students are coming into kindergarten through early intervention with extensive needs. Our health services team members are part of those teams. Student assistance program. The student assistance program is a longstanding team that really our team members receive specialized training. Anyone can make an anonymous referral to our SAP teams, and they look at concerns related to alcohol, tobacco, drug use, mental health, and put interventions in place for students. Our achievement teams at each building level that are, monitoring the progress of all students and putting interventions in place as students' needs, and they serve as critical members of our IEP and 504 teams as well. They provide skilled nursing procedures so that we can have students who have significant medical needs remain in their home schools to the extent possible. You can see some examples of some of the skilled nursing procedures that we actually are required and do within our schools here. They're required to provide specific nursing services required by the IEPs and 504s. And our students with disabilities who would have an IEP or 504 are entitled to equal access, and that includes to make sure that their medical needs are met. So we often need to provide nursing services on field trips, before and after school athletics and activities, during our summer programming. Our special education students who are out on community-based instruction and work programs often require nursing support as well. Any students who might need a one-to-one nurse based on the level of medical need, and during transportation to and from school. So we're responsible for ensuring that at all points they have access and can access safely.
Kim, are all those in your budget then, even like the field trips and athletic stuff? Does that?
For the nursing support, yes.
So that would be in your budget?
Mm-hmm.
To your knowledge, if we had to not have a field trip because we couldn't supply nurses, to your knowledge, has that happened?
Yes, that has happened. Yeah. I would say that there are examples where resources are exhausted. I would say the same for transportation as well, that we've exhausted resources. Yep. We currently, and I was also going to mention this, I mean, we budget for 2 nurses per day, full-time, for field trips to cover the trips themselves. And our health services staff do an amazing job also of providing district and community level health promotion under Terry Quinlan's leadership and with support of the other student services supervisors, really providing a lot of community parent trainings, parent information sessions, doing the parent speaker series, really trying to get information out to the community for health and safety. They also serve a critical role in providing trainings to our district staff. Our CSNs are able to do the CPR training for staff. They provide training in life-threatening allergies, diabetes, seizures. They provide to all district staff, and then more intensive training for students who might have more specialized needs to their individual teams. They review all the mandated immunizations, physical exams, and health records required for entrance to school. To give some example of some of the highlighted costs, and you can see when you compare the overall budget, this is really just a snapshot to give you a sense of what some of the expenses are related to. So you can see the technology-related fees. Health Master is our electronic method for data management for health services. So that is an ongoing fee for the technology support. The general nursing supplies we're required to replenish and make sure that every school has the supplies that they need. And so there is an annual replenishing of those supplies. Included within that is the cost of also providing supplies to our non-public schools. And then, of course, equipment repairs that we're required to do. Another example of a cost within health services, we do have a contract with a physician that's on consult with the district. The proposed contract will be for just shy of $38,000 for the 18-19 school year. This physician provides mandated services for students. Plus, they also do our Department of Transportation exams, pre-employment exams. For medical assistance, our access billing, there is required to have a physician do an IEP review, so they do that for us as well, and serves as an important consultant for both my department as well as the Human Resources Department when there are issues regarding employee and student health issues. We also have a dental consultant. We are mandated to provide screenings in grades K1, 3, and 7. So we estimate that that's approximately 50 hours worth of time, and we do that with an independent consultant. So it's an example of some of the costs within health services. And when you look at all of this, really the key influences are mandates from the Department of Health, PA school code, services, again, that are required for students who have disabilities that we're required to provide, and our services for our non-public schools. So these are all things that really influence the cost of services. Clinical services, our clinical team includes our school psychologists, our school social workers, and our mental health counselors. In addition, I think we all think quickly of all of the evaluations that our school psychologists complete, but the clinical team really serves a really important role even beyond that evaluation process. They provide crisis intervention support within all of our schools. They're participants of those teams that I mentioned that our health services members are also part of, really working to support students and their families. When a student is in crisis, it's one of these team members that are specially trained and can intervene, and not just in the moment at school, but also working with the families of students in crisis for how they can access supports to help support their children. For clinical services for 18-19, as the board is aware, we have added an additional school psychologist moving forward. So we currently have 11 full-time school psychologists. We are now moving to 12, and that is based on a careful review of the work that is being asked of our school psychologists, the workload that's required, and the need to provide the supports. We do have a child find responsibility, and this directly impacts the clinical services budget. This means the district's required to identify, locate, and evaluate any child within our district that has a disability through the age of 21. And that child find responsibility extends not just to district students, but also to our students who are attending non-public. So we do have some families who request evaluations of the district for their children attending. We have approximately, I'd say 75 to 100 requests for evaluation from non-public school children's families. We also have an obligation for an ongoing child find. So you could have a student who is identified, but their needs change over time. We have a responsibility to continue to evaluate and assess where their needs are and make sure that the programming that's being offered is appropriate to where the student's needs are at the current time. A little different, since we highlighted the non-public aspect of the health services costs, the district isn't responsible for a child find for students who are not district residents, even if they're attending a non-public. The student's home district would be responsible for that. So those 75 to 100 non-public evaluations, those are district residents. When we think about the costs for clinical services, just to give you an idea, when we're doing an evaluation, our school psychologists spend a good bit of time writing really comprehensive reports that teams can utilize to really make sure that programming is appropriate for students. A total evaluation would take approximately 15 hours from start to finish to complete that process for one child. It is less for an evaluation for just gifted services, but that's still approximately 5 hours to do the process. So it is a good bit of time that our team members take putting into these. I did reference crisis intervention. We have a students in crisis, and our clinical team members intervene and doing risk assessments and working with the family. That could be 1 to 3 hours in a given day that they're spending doing that crisis intervention with a specific student. We do have approximately 10% of the school-age population evaluated every year. Universal screening has had a significant impact on this. For the summer of 2017, the school district issued a total of 202 permissions to evaluate to look at eligibility for gifted services. So that's a high number of evaluations that needed completed. That's also something that's going into the need to increase our number of school psychologists. Our school psychologists also support with evaluations for students who are transitioning into the district from early intervention services. So that is also another area where we provide evaluation support.
Kim, do those numbers include reevaluations as well?
They do. Yeah, the district, for students who are already identified with a disability and receiving special education services, the district is required to do a reevaluation every 3 years. For all, but if a student's intellectually disabled, it's every 2 years.
And so is that part of that 10%?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
So that 10% is new and reevaluated?
Correct.
Okay.
And increasing. Our number of evaluations is increasing. Some highlighted costs, so you get a sense. There is a high cost for materials. There's a lot of evaluations that are occurring, so there's a lot of assessment booklets, test protocols, rating scales. We do as much as we can through computerized scoring programs, and our team has been really diligent about keeping on top of when new releases are going to happen for assessments and really planning the most cost-effective way. We have several programs where there was a new test protocol released, a new version of it. So we've done, 2 to 3 year contracts with those companies because that's the most cost-effective way to do it. So we do keep on top of when we expect new versions of test protocols to come out. We also, have unique circumstances where a student might need a bilingual evaluation or a psychiatric evaluation, and that's an additional cost. So to give you an idea, if we have a student who requires a bilingual evaluation, that's around $2,000 cost to the district per evaluation.
Just explain how that is determined. Is that the cost of materials to do the evaluation?
For the bilingual evaluation, we need to find an evaluator who can evaluate in that language that the student's main language. And so we have to find an evaluator. Typically, we work with our intermediate units to help support with finding that person. So that's a direct cost to an outside psychologist to support with that evaluation. And it's really the achievement teams under the direction of the school psychologist at the building that is making the determination of the need for a bilingual evaluation.
Thanks.
Another example of a cost under clinical services is our mental health therapists. You can see $138,800 for 2 full-time therapists. These are each staff members that are assigned, one at each of our high schools. They provide resources and supports for students at the secondary level. They work with both our general education and our identified students. We're doing crisis intervention, preventative interventions. They're a key team member on our SAP teams. So it's another example of a cost under this. Key influences for our clinical budget. It does require highly qualified staff for the work that we're asking them to do, and we really do have an incredible clinical team with a wide range of experiences and expertise. We're very fortunate in that way, and that does influence the cost. Federal and state mandates, I mentioned Child Find specifically. And then, as I also mentioned, the universal screening, we've seen those numbers increasing over time as well, and that's definitely influenced the overall budget for clinical services. For counseling, these are our school counselors, and we also have a college access counselor who works at both of our high schools. And they provide a comprehensive school counseling program looking at academic, career, and personal development. We have a total of 25.5 counselors currently doing work across our 10 schools. And there's so much that our counseling department does in terms of supporting families and students. There's a lot of skill instruction. Our counselors do a lot of direct instruction with students at all levels. At the elementary level, some examples of that: empathy building, impulse control, problem-solving steps. At the middle level, they look at understanding the cycle of bullying, considering self-discovery through Naviance to look at interests and what students might be interested in moving forward. And then, of course, at the high school level, again, continued use of Naviance in particular for self-discovery, understanding standardized testing and the impact of that on their future plans, college readiness skills, budget, time management, are all things that our counselors are working on with students and families.
Kim, for those unfamiliar, could you just explain what Naviance is, please?
Yes. So Naviance is a computerized program that provides a variety of resources, everywhere from interest inventories to actual connection to colleges with applications. And so it's something that we start working on at this point with our middle school students. And it, again, is like our database, our management system for managing a student's access to that. Parents are provided with access as well, so they can go in with their student or they can see what their student has done within the system. So it's a very valuable resource that's been used for the district for some time now.
As I recall, there's a college feature on that helps you identify what your chances are, where you fit in the likelihood of acceptance into different schools and things. Is that still part of it?
It would still be part of it if it was before. I don't know specifically.
I'm getting nods from.
I can just Yes,
Thank you.
it's the tool that the student services team works, counselors work with the families to support the college process, from identifying the right school to interest and skills.
Right, so it's been a while, but I just recall, put in your SATs, put in your GPA, put in some other things, and then you look at different schools and say, okay, students with that profile had this likelihood of acceptance, and go from there, right?
All that is there, but it's even a more direct connection. That's how you actually apply. That's how letters of recommendation are forwarded to colleges through the Naviance platform.
Counselors are also working with academic advising. That's not just like educational programming, but it's also looking at the academic curriculum and how students are accessing supports within the academic setting. They also work on personal and social counseling as needed, stress management, conflict resolution, crisis intervention, and then, of course, they're doing, as we discussed, the career and college counseling, career interest, personality styles, really looking at what options there might be for students as they're moving forward. The counseling budget does also include costs related to our testing program. I've mentioned several times now universal screening. Some of the assessment measures are included within the counseling budget. ERB testing is conducted at the 4th grade level, and PSATs in grades 10 and 11. Our counseling team also provides a lot of parent training and support, and also has 504 case management oversight as well.
Kim, can you just talk about the difference between a counselor and a psychologist?
Oh, sure.
And their roles?
Yeah, sure. So the school psychologists really are primarily doing evaluations, working with students that have identified disabilities and guiding the teams in program development. They are doctoral level staff members who have training in that clinical background. Our counselors are working more day-to-day with working with students with academic supports, with whenever they have social needs coming up. So the counselors are working with all of the students which are assigned in terms of program planning. Psychologists are involved with students on an as-needed basis.
So a student who's having a problem in school would likely go to a counselor, but
First.
if they're identified as having some sort of additional need, they might be then referred outside or even to our psychologist for therapy or...
Correct, right. Typically, when you're talking about a student who needs additional support, who is in crisis, your first line of defense is going to be your school counselor. But given the situation, the circumstances, that student's individual needs, the school psychologist might become involved for students who are presenting with more significant needs. Our counselors are also trained to do risk assessments and can complete them as well. We just sometimes need our psychologists who have a more extensive clinical background as needed. So some examples of highlighted costs within our counseling budget. Professional and technical services for the district's testing program that we've talked about. General supplies. Our counselors are doing a lot of direct instruction with students. Some of the programs that I'm sure you've all heard of, Second Step, No Place for Hate, Love and Logic, the Alveus Bullying, college guides at the secondary level, that's all included within the counseling budget. The technology-related supplies and fees, this includes Naviance that we've also discussed. Included for the 18-19 budget is also curriculum development. As you've heard in other meetings, the SSA mandates are indicating that we need to have look at Act 339 for curriculum development and ensure that we have curriculum that addresses the academic standards for career education and work. So this figure represents curriculum development that will happen during the summer to prepare to meet those mandates. For gifted education, This is based directly on PA School Code, Chapter 16. It requires the district to provide services and programming for students who are identified in need of gifted support students. The programming that's provided is based on the unique needs of students, not solely on their classification. We have some students who are gifted and not in need of services or who elect not to accept services. It's really based individually on the students' individual needs. And the idea is to enable them to participate in acceleration or enrichment programs or both as appropriate and receive those services according to what their strengths are. We currently have 1,242 students receiving gifted support students. This figure does include 63 students who are dually identified. Dually identified means that they are identified to receive both gifted support services and special education services to address their needs related to a disability.
So, I'm sorry, so just as an example, a student who is identified as gifted and hearing impaired, they would be a GIP and a 504, right? Or would they be a GIP and a?
Great question. So it depends. If a student needs direct special education support, so if their disability is to the degree that it requires remedial instruction or direct instruction outside of the scope of general education, that is an IEP. You don't have two documents. If you have an IEP, it's all inclusive of addressing gifted needs. You don't have an IEP and a 504, you don't have an IEP and a GIEP. It's all inclusive within that IEP document. You could, though, have a student who requires gifted support that maybe, we'll use your example, has hearing-related needs, but they just need accommodation. They don't need direct instruction. That can be provided through a 504, and they would have two separate documents. The GIEP itself is a strength-based document and address the strengths of a student. The 504 plan then would be the accommodation for the hearing needs.
So those 63 duly identified students actually have IEPs and not GIPs?
Correct. I think it's important, though, to include them in that number because they are receiving gifted supports and they do receive services that fall under this particular budget. Some highlighted costs, some instructional materials that are used K to 12. I gave some examples that I imagine that you've heard of. We do use some Rosetta Stone, Montgomery Virtual Program, our online courses. We have some students who require, based on their needs, an online course to address their needs, so we include that within this budget. And then, as was very public, we had the program evaluation of our gifted services, and we are moving forward with the work, a 5-year plan to address the recommendations that were found within that program evaluation. And one of the recommendations that came out of that was to hire a consultant to review our universal screening procedures, to really see if having fresh eyes on if there would be recommended changes for how we're moving through our universal screening. So we did include money within the proposed budget to be able to hire a consultant to do that work. As you know, when we hire consultants to come in and look at procedures, it takes a bit of time, so this is something that we wanted to get started with right away. Special education, again, this is where the highest portion of our costs go. We have all highly qualified special education teachers working with our students. This includes our related service providers. That's the physical therapy, occupational therapy, vision, hearing, orientation, and mobility. And it also includes our paraprofessional support staff, our instructional assistants, our behavior aides, our job coaches are included within this cost. And this is really directly linked to federal and state mandates with IDEA and Chapter 14. But in addition to that, our costs are also directly related to our district's commitment to the inclusion of students with disabilities. This is a community, a school community, a larger community that has a commitment to allowing students that have disabilities to be able to participate to the extent possible with their peers. And that commitment is seen throughout, and I'll talk a little bit more about it, but it does influence the cost of services.
Kim, again, and we'll probably touch on this again when we do Megan's presentation on human resources, but highly qualified is not a subjective term. That's a...
It's correct.
Could you describe a little
Correct.
bit what that means?
So highly qualified is determined by state mandates. All of our special education teachers have degrees in special education, are certified to teach special education, and the largest percent of our teachers are also have a secondary certification, meaning they might be elementary certified as well. They might have secondary math, depending on what their assignment is. So they are highly qualified, and that is determined by the state. And again, similar to what I shared with our school psychologists, I mean, we're very fortunate that we have high-quality staff within the district providing these services. So this is just a sense of the enrollment overview, so that you can see the number of students receiving services. Currently, 1,220 students receiving special education supports. That represents approximately 14% of district students receiving special education. All supports and services for these students are determined by individual IEP teams. So when we're planning the budget for special education, it's one of the things that has to be considered. We can't direct or mandate what happens for each student. They are individual teams, which parents are an important member of, that are making decisions about what's best for each individual child in terms of supports and services. It changes. The IEPs are very fluid documents, so as student needs changes, the IEP supports and services can change as well. Some highlighted costs within special education, assistive technology and progress monitoring tools are some of technology-related fees. The assistive technology is for use of not just facilitating communication. We do have students in district who are nonverbal, who require assistive technology to be able to communicate basic needs and wants. But it's also for students who need additional support with accessing the curriculum. So Solo Suite, which is really, it's how they receive information, so functions of having text read to them, or how the output of information, so tools to help with written expression. Boardmaker, Everyday Speech, Proloquo, those are some examples of the tools that we use. Progress monitoring tools, we're responsible for ensuring that students are making adequate progress on their IEP goals. And so it's important to have tools in place for special education teachers and teams to be able to monitor that progress so that we can make appropriate recommendations for goals for students and to make adjustments as needed based on that student progress. So you can see, then I just gave you a summary of the costs for that, both over $100,000 for elementary and secondary for technology fees.
Kim, can you talk a little bit, so elementary, it's about the same number of students, K to 5 as it is 6 to 12, maybe a little, it's probably even more 6 to 12
Right.
total students than it is K to 5. Why would K to 5 be more?
In terms of cost?
Yeah, why would we be spending more at that?
Well, a couple things. First of all, you have the one-to-one initiative at the high schools. So if we didn't have the one-to-one laptop initiative, that would increase our cost because there's a lot of students with special needs that benefit from that program. You also have students who are younger in terms of development with communication, so they require a higher level of support. So as time goes on, they become more independent with communication and might need less intensive support with that. Some other highlighted costs in terms of special education. We do have a literacy specialist. We are so fortunate to be able to provide Wilson training to special education teachers. We have a Wilson trainer that it is a year-long process to become certified, and it has to be a trainer that has worked directly with the Wilson company and is approved by them, and we are fortunate to have that continue. To provide that level of support. Wilson is one of the reading interventions that we utilize within the district. We also have specialized counseling. So we have some students who are intellectually disabled, and as they're going through adolescence, it's a very unique time in terms of understanding how to appropriately interact with peers, how do you address new feelings of interest in other students, and it requires a very specialized type of counselor. So we have included that. It's individually based by IEP teams. Some other highlighted costs, again, just so that you get a sense of where some of the funding is utilized for. We do utilize what we are able to through MCIU. Our hearing services, vision, orientation and mobility, and our behavior specialists are all MCIU employees, and we contract with MCIU to provide these services. So you can get a sense of what the range of costs are for those particular areas. We do currently have and are recommending to continue to have 3 full-time behavior specialists to provide behavioral supports. Those behavior specialists serve as really critical team members, not just in completing functional behavior assessments to really do an initial look at behavior, but to really work with teams on data collection measures, on intervening when interventions that we're putting into place aren't working for a student. Our behavior specialists are specially trained to be able to provide that support. So we do continue to recommend that we have 3 full-time behavior specialists as we're moving forward. I am happy to be able to share that we've also worked diligently with looking at what programs we can provide in district. We start with the understanding that we have a commitment to, we want our students to be able to stay in our district schools to the extent possible. We recognize and respect that there are students whose needs are so highly specialized that we can't provide it in district, and we understand that. But to the degree that we're able, we'd like our students to be able to receive those services in district, and we've worked really hard to continue to develop the continuum of programming that we offer. We have expanded our programming in all areas: autistic support, emotional support, life skills support, and learning support. We've expanded those programs, and we've seen that it's allowed us to really be able to keep students in district to a higher degree. This is an example of a cost savings that the district has benefited from by doing the in-district programming. So doing the in-district programming, we benefit in a lot of ways. Our staff have more oversight on what's being provided. There's a deeper connection between what students are doing and connection back to the curriculum. We are able to eliminate the need for transportation and the time that's wasted in transport from one program to another. So historically, we had been utilizing MCIU for some of our services for our students who are 18 to 21. We were utilizing MCIU for the PACE Lab, and this is now in district, so I'm showing you a picture of that. The PACE Lab is a vocational assessment tool where students go through a variety of tasks, and at the end of it, we have a report that indicates what areas of interest a student might be interested in terms of looking for employment as they move forward. Our students who are in our autistic support and life skills support programs at the secondary level take advantage of this particular lab and service. We also were utilizing MCIU for students who needed independent living skills. MCIU has a simulated apartment program. We were sending students to that particular apartment. We now have fully functional simulated apartments in both of the high schools. Currently, the one at Lower Merion High School is in use every day. So students are now able to access that right within their home school. And the other area, again, really, this is, majority looking at students who are 18 to 21. We also have expanded our work experiences that we're providing. Previously, we utilized other services to be able to help provide that work experience. And we've been able to shift and do that more within the community. By shifting the work experiences within the community, we've also been able to expand what we're able to offer. We've developed partnerships with Villanova, in addition to the partnership that we have with Bryn Mawr College. We have partnerships with both of the local hospitals where we have students go out and do work experiences. Some of our local retailers, Be Good Restaurant, Doggy Style Retail Store, And then also with the township, with the Lower Merion Township building, our Lower Merion Book Processing Center. So those are all locations where we've developed relationships, and we have students who are going out with support to learn job skills, to be able to help meet their transition goals when they transition from our district. And I say all that to say, like, this is an amazing opportunity for our students. We've improved our programming by doing it. And at the same time, it's been a cost-effective measure for the district. For those three things alone, and I use this by way of example, for these three things alone, we have saved almost $200,000 a year by offering these supports in district. In the 16-17 budget, we had indicated a need for $193,000 to go to for these services. And by bringing those costs in district and bringing these programs in district, we've reduced those costs in addition to improving the programming that we're providing. And that's just the costs within my budget. This also has had a direct impact on transportation costs as well, because now everything is right here and community-based. In terms of out-of-district placements, this is also part of the special education budget. As I referenced, there are students who have highly specialized needs that cannot be addressed within the district. We continue to work to develop programming so that students who are able to remain in their home school are able to do so. You see what our current numbers are this year. We're holding steady at that 3.5% of students, even as enrollment is increasing. Of that 3.5%, 2.4% are non-public schools. Intermediate units, which we use whenever we're able to for programming, represent the other portion of that. For out-of-district placements, it requires a lot of careful planning. And as you can see from this next slide, here's some examples of tuition costs for some of the programs where we currently have students placed. The district doesn't have control over those tuition costs. Once a student is placed at a program, it becomes their pendant placement, which means that is their guaranteed placement until an IEP team, along with parent participation and parent approval, changes that placement. So once a student's in a placement, these costs can fluctuate, and the district really doesn't have control over what happens with those costs. We typically estimate a 3 to 5% increase in tuition as we're projecting for the next year. But you can see a range of what the program costs might be. When we have a student who requires highly specialized programming and needs an out-of-district placement, we're not looking at what the costs are. What the teams do and what they're obligated to do is really look to secure the placement that's most appropriate to meet that student's needs, and not base it on the cost of the program. But you can see a program, LifeWorks Academy, provides support for students who have emotional support needs. Lakeside is an alternative education program, they have students that have learning support needs, emotional support needs. Then you get into some more specialized programming. Vanguard School provides services for students primarily on the autism spectrum. Same with Comprehensive Learning Center and CHAMP. CHAMP is a CCIU program, but those are for students who require such a highly specialized program. All students in that program have a one-to-one that's included as part of that cost based on what they need. Other expenses, in addition to what you see, this is the basic tuition cost, may or may not include ESY, extended school year services, one-to-one aid, specialized transportation is included as part of that, and those are all costs to the district when students require out-of-district.
Kim,
Yes.
there was a point in time where we pretty much sent out of district any student with any significant disabilities at all. And we worked really hard to bring those students back into the district. Do we have a sense whether this continues to be, in addition, you want the least restrictive environment, you want them back in our own schools, but also just from a strictly financial perspective, you gave the example of the PASS lab and the simulated apartment, but do we have a sense whether we're in addition to keeping the kids closed, are we also saving money by keeping them in district?
When you start looking at the students who require more intensive supports, it's not necessarily the case. They typically require a more specialized program. They might require full-time supports in district. We do have some students who are full-time level of special education support, so the caseloads of those teachers are lower, so that means the cost of that teacher per student is higher. They still require extensive related services, so that's like a per hour, like a per session fee. So their costs are honestly still high for those students that require specialized programming. I would say where we're able to be more cost-effective, like the services that I shared, our team really does look at that to try to be cost-effective as well while not sacrificing on the programming. Key influences in special education, of course, the federal and state mandates that I've already referenced. And again, as I mentioned before, each student's individualized education plan is determined by that individual student's IEP team. So it's those individual teams with which you have an administrator present, the regular education teacher, a special education teacher, any related service providers, and the parent making decisions about what's most appropriate for that individual child. And so that's then what the district is obligated to provide. Newly enrolled students also impact. We every year have students come to us and say, we've purposely come to Lower Merion School District for the quality of special education services that you provide. And, you know, that could include students who have pretty significant needs. And then, again, there are costs that increase beyond our control, tuition and contracted services that we don't always have control over what those costs are. There's an example of some other costs, expenses that are not controlled by the district that we have to plan for. We have students who may need for a short period of time due to medical necessity, time away from school, and we offer homebound services for those students. And so we budget for that, but we'd never know in advance how many students might need that temporary level of support. Same with the day treatment facilities, which is a mental health placement. We can't always predict how many students within the district might need that level of support. Charter schools is another area. Under my budget, I cover the special education students. We currently have 9 students who are enrolled in charter schools identified as special education that then we have to pay their tuition costs, which is approximately $50,000 per student. An example of how we can't really control for that, we don't have any oversight over the evaluation of those students. Charter schools serve as their own LEAs, which means they're responsible for child find. They're responsible for evaluating and providing special education services. The district has no oversight, responsibility, or say in identification and programming for those students. So it's a set fee for students, whether they are on the lower end of the services they require, maybe perhaps a student who requires articulation support through speech and language, or a student who requires significant life skill support who might be intellectually disabled. That's quite a range of services that might be provided. The charter school receives the same amount from the district regardless.
How's that number determined?
The $50,000, that's determined by the state.
That's a good question. There's a formula that the state has that you need to complete to come up with the calculation. That's how it has been run. Just recently, in the last week or so, the state has stated that they're not going to go through the same process. So it's uncertain going forward how that is going to be calculated.
So really, then, this is just a placeholder in your budget because we don't really know what the numbers are.
It is, right, for the current year, it's around a little over $49,000 for special ed. It goes up depending upon the cost. So we just put in $50,000 for right now. That number fluctuates from year to year, the number of students that we have. So I think that's a good number Ms. Frazier and I came up with.
So as you can see, costs we don't really have control over. And then also like adjudicated placements for students who need that, and there's a portion of funding that we have to provide for that. So you see the scope of the department
I'm
is...
sorry to interrupt. So What about an adjudicated student who's not special needs? Do we have to contribute to the cost of their education?
Yes, so
as
for
well?
these expenses here that you see, the special education students are covered under my budget. For any regular education students who fall under any of these categories, they are included under Ms. Schaefer's budget. And you can see that the scope of the department is quite large. We provide a lot of supports and services for students and families. And this just gives you a sense of the amount of students that are directly impacted by the supports and services. It's pretty equal. Approximately 14% of students have individualized education plans. About 14% receive gifted support services and the 504 accommodation plans. So it's a large portion of students who are directly benefiting from the supports and services provided through student services.
Great, thank you. Thank you very much, Kim. Just before I open it up broadly, although I don't know I don't know if anybody has anything they want to add to what Kim has presented. You had mentioned before we started that, you know, your budget's 100 lines long, or hundreds of lines.
Hundreds
long.
of line items.
So I guess it's, you know, to actually see your budget would be a difficult thing for us to, you know, line by line. It's
400, probably even over 1,000 line items that make up the budget, because we see special ed, every exceptionality is broken out individually, line by line.
so when you do your budget, you're going through line by line.
Correct.
And you're not saying, okay, this was my line this year, I'm just going to add 2% or 3%. It was my line this year, these are my needs for next year. We have a change in number of students or a change in, and so each one of those lines, then you go through and
I
adjust based on needs.
I do, and we have a pretty extensive process among the student services administrators where we don't just look at the money that's been expended, but we look specifically how many students received that particular type of service. What are our projections as we move forward? So we look at previous expenditure over multiple years. We look at number of students receiving those services, and we do that. You see each of those individual aspects, health, clinical, gifted, those are all separately delineated out, and we go through each line item together and make really informed decisions. I feel like our team is actually doing a great job with being deliberate about how we're utilizing district funds.
I think in addition to that, we do, as the administrative cabinet as a whole, review the budgets too, to review what their needs are, and also provide input to the process also.
And as you pointed out throughout your presentation, many of the services we provide are mandated services, so it's not even subjective. It's pretty much not like I wish I could add X, Y, Z. I'm pretty much required for
Correct.
this and that.
And IDEA specifically mandates that the services that you're providing are not based on cost. I mean, that's explicitly stated. We can't make determinations based on the cost that it would be to a district. It's about making sure that student needs are met.
Although we can, as you pointed out, make decisions where we can try and be more cost-effective in how we provide the actual services.
Correct.
So we do
Correct.
try and give thought to costs without compromising quality of care.
Correct. Actually, and I would say improving quality of what we're providing.
Any other questions from the board?
I mean, I just crushed the, I mean, it appears like over 80% of your budget is personnel and salaries. I mean, that roughly,
Okay.
so it is a very labor-intensive, not
Yes.
so much a product-intensive, you don't need so much as equipment, you need people face-to-face with students and doing all of this work more than anything else.
I would say particularly for the student services aspects of it, yes. I think the materials and supplies are heaviest under special education, but yes, personnel costs, because we need the staff to be able to deliver the services and support students. Yes.
Thank you very much, Kim. I really appreciate it. The one thing I'd like to add before we adjourn the meeting is we did get an email with a number of questions regarding our last presentation, and we had hoped to be able to answer them at this meeting. And but with the snow days and the specificity of the questions, we just didn't have time to get them answered before this meeting. So we're going to try and shoot for the next meeting to address those questions. I did not get any additional questions from board members for our last presentation, but I welcome board members here, and I'll stress to other board members that, and to the public, if there are any additional questions, specific questions you have regarding the presentation in this subject area, if you can get them to us, we'll try and address them by the next meeting. If we can't get them answered by the next meeting, we'll have them for the following. But sometimes a question comes to you later, and you weren't thinking about it while you were here. So, any other questions or comments? Thank you very much. With that, we're adjourned. No, there's no public comment. Thank you. Oh, and our next meeting is the 25th, and it's still during the day, so it'll be 8:30 here, and then the last one's in the evening.